My name is Caleb Monroe, and everything changed on the night of November 12, 2019. I didn't wake up that morning expecting anything different. I got out of bed, laced up my old scuffed work shoes, and left the apartment with my earbuds already playing a song I've heard 100 times before. I was just doing life, simple, repetitive, forgettable. My job at Louie's Diner wasn't glamorous, but it helped pay the bills and kept me close to my family. That night, I picked up a double shift because one of the other guys called out, and I figured a little overtime wouldn't hurt. I texted my mom around 6:45 to let her know I'd be walking home later than usual. She gave me her usual "be careful" followed by a praying hands emoji, and I sent back a thumbs up. I remember the fluorescent lights of the diner humming above me while I cleaned the grill, the smell of burnt grease hanging in the air, and that weird sense of calm that always hit after the dinner rush was over. By the time I clocked out, my feet were aching and my shoulders were tight, but I was still in a good mood. It was cold outside, November in Glenridge usually is, but it wasn't the kind of cold that bites, it was the kind that nudges you into your hoodie and wakes you up a little. I liked walking through town that late when everything was closed and the traffic had thinned out. It made the world feel smaller, quieter. I cut down Chestnut Street, passed by the old church with the cracked stained glass window, and turned onto Harbor Lane where the depot stood. That part of town didn't have working streetlights, hadn't for weeks, but I knew the way like the back of my hand. I crossed the street just as I'd done 1,000 times before. I didn't see the truck. I didn't hear it either, not until the last possible second. There was a flash of headlights, the sound of tires screaming against asphalt, and then the kind of silence that doesn't make sense until you're inside it. People say time slows down when you're about to die, but that's not true. It doesn't slow down. It just stops being something you can track. There was no pain, at least not in the way you'd expect. One moment I was stepping off the curb, the next I was somewhere else entirely. I don't mean I blacked out. I mean I left. My body might have been sprawled out on that pavement with broken ribs and blood pooling from my mouth, but I was no longer there. I floated above myself, looking down at the chaos. I saw the way my legs were twisted unnaturally, how my left arm bent in a way it never should. A man ran toward me screaming for someone to call 911. A woman nearby collapsed to her knees and started praying so loud I could hear every word even though her mouth wasn't moving. It wasn't sound. It was like I could feel her words, like they carried weight. Then I looked up and the sky began to dissolve. It peeled back like fog under sunlight, revealing something golden and warm and endless. I started moving, no walking, no flying, just moving, into a tunnel of light. It wasn't sterile or blinding. It had texture, warmth, and something deeper I can't explain. It wrapped around me like a memory I never knew I had. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I was home. At the end of this tunnel stood someone I couldn't see with my eyes but recognized instantly with my soul. Jesus. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't symbolic. I knew it was him the same way you know your own name. He radiated a kind of love that shattered me completely and then put me back together in the same breath. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me and every fear, every question, every doubt I'd ever carried broke open and poured out like rain. I tried to fall to my knees, but I didn't even know if I still had knees. My soul collapsed instead. I wept. Not because I was scared, but because I'd never known such beauty, such safety, such absolute acceptance. And in the stillness of that place, I heard him say my name. Just that. Caleb. And it was enough to erase a lifetime of feeling overlooked, unnoticed, and uncertain. Jesus didn't rush anything. He let the silence linger like it was something holy, and somehow it was. There's a kind of silence in that place that doesn't feel empty. It feels alive. I stood there, or floated, or existed, or whatever word fits, and just soaked in his presence like it was the first sunlight after an endless winter. There were no clocks, no pressure, no anxiety tapping at the corners of my mind. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't worried about saying the wrong thing or trying to explain myself or wondering if I was enough. He knew me, every piece of me, and he didn't look away. Then, without speaking, he began to show me things. Not with words or pictures, but by placing me directly into them. It was like stepping into someone else's memory, only they weren't someone else's, they were mine. We started in my childhood. I saw myself as a little boy, curled up on the bathroom floor after my dad slammed the door and didn't come back. I remembered the choking feeling in my chest, how I tried to pray but didn't know what to say, how I eventually stopped altogether. I watched myself get older, harder, more withdrawn. I saw how I'd smile at friends but carry pain in silence. I saw how I'd sit in youth group with my arms folded, pretending I didn't care while secretly hoping someone would say something that would make me believe again. And Jesus watched all of this with me. Not once did he flinch or frown. His eyes were full of so much compassion it made me ache. Then the scene changed. I saw myself walking into a church service a few months before the accident, just after one of the most brutal elections we'd ever had. The sanctuary was packed, but you could feel the tension like static in the air. People were whispering about each other, judging each other based on bumper stickers and social media posts. The pastor preached on unity, but it didn't land. Not really. Because half the room thought the other half had betrayed the gospel, and the other half felt the same in reverse. And I saw myself in the back row, arms crossed, heart numb. I watched myself tune out completely when someone prayed for the president, because I didn't like him. I saw how quickly my heart would shut down when politics came up, how easily I labeled people. Then Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt his grief enter me like a tidal wave. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was sorrow, deep, ancient sorrow. Like the heart of a father watching his children fight over scraps while the feast sat waiting on the table. "This wasn't my plan," he said. And his voice, my God, his voice, was like a river running through my bones. "They've traded me for idols. Not golden calves but golden crowns. Not carved images but carved parties." I wanted to cry, to scream, to say I didn't know, but I couldn't lie, not here. Because I did know. I'd seen it. I'd heard people pray more passionately for their candidates than for the lost. I'd heard more sermons about national greatness than kingdom humility. I'd seen believers tearing each other apart online, questioning each other's salvation based on who they supported in an election. And the worst part? I had joined in. Quietly, passively, but I had. I had rolled my eyes at people I was supposed to love. I had refused to listen. I had built walls inside my heart and called it discernment. And now here I was, standing in the light of the one I claimed to follow, realizing how far we'd all drifted. The next vision came hard and fast. Jesus lifted his hand and suddenly I was inside dozens of churches at once. Mega churches, storefront chapels, country sanctuaries. Some were thriving on the surface. Worship bands played flawlessly, lights moved with the music, people lifted their hands in rhythm. But beneath it all was division. I could feel it in the air like rot beneath a fresh coat of paint. People weren't worshiping together. They were worshiping in clusters, each in silent judgment of the others. Some were burning with political zeal, convinced their cause was righteous and all others were corrupt. Others were bitter and jaded, having turned their disappointment into armor. And then I saw a pulpit split down the middle. On one side was a cross. On the other, a campaign banner. And Jesus looked me dead in the eyes and said, "They have divided my house. They've made me a mascot for their agendas, a mouthpiece for their power plays. But I will not be mocked. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I'm not left or right. I am the Lamb." I fell again, whatever that meant in that space. My soul couldn't take it. I wanted to hide, to vanish, to undo everything I'd ever said or thought in pride. But he didn't cast me out. He reached down again and lifted me, not with judgment but with mercy. And he whispered, "I didn't show you this to shame you. I showed you this to send you." I didn't speak. I couldn't. His words settled into me like seeds burying deep in soil, and I knew they'd grow whether I wanted them to or not. I stood again beside Jesus, though stood still doesn't quite explain it, and the space around us started changing once more. It wasn't just a shift in location. It felt like I was being placed into the very heartbeat of something vast, something spiritual that pulsed through the country. We were now moving, not walking or flying but flowing, through what looked like a series of living scenes. I was placed inside a small house church in Missouri. There were maybe 20 people huddled close together, kneeling on worn carpet in silence. No lights. No music. Just prayer, raw, aching, desperate prayer. I could hear their words like whispers in the deepest part of my soul. Lord, break our pride. Bring unity to your people. We repent for making idols out of men. It was beautiful, almost fragile, like it could be shattered by a single breath. Then the vision shifted again. This time I stood in a vast auditorium filled with thousands of people, LED screens glowing behind a spotless stage, a crowd roaring like a concert. But something felt wrong. The sermon was full of clever lines, applause breaks, and humor, but I couldn't feel the presence of Jesus in the room. It wasn't evil. It wasn't even malicious. It was just hollow. Like someone had built an impressive machine that ran without oil, impressive to look at but powerless to heal. I saw people clapping, nodding, laughing. But inside their spirits, there was division, an invisible line dividing pews and hearts. I heard their thoughts without needing to be told. One man was angry because the pastor had prayed for a politician he despised. A woman across the aisle silently judged everyone who didn't stand during the national anthem portion of the service. Another sat quietly, aching to worship, but afraid to raise her hands because of the arguments she'd had with others in the room just last week over a Facebook post. It was all there, hidden beneath the performance. And Jesus beside me. He didn't rage. He didn't accuse. He just wept. Not loud sobs, but a quiet, soul-breaking cry that shook the foundations of everything I thought I understood about him. The God I saw wasn't distant or vengeful. He was heartbroken. Then I saw him walk to the front of that auditorium, past the cameras and lights, past the polished stage and glowing screens, and he sat down on the floor. Just sat there, cross-legged, silent, and nobody saw him. Not a single person in that crowd noticed that Jesus had entered their sanctuary. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab someone, anyone, and shout, "He's here. He's right in front of you." But my voice didn't exist there, not in the way I wanted. I was a witness, nothing more. And then the space shifted again. Now I was in a living room. A small one. A black family sitting with a white family around a dinner table. No news on, no phones out. Just open Bibles and tears. They were talking about racism. About division. About how tired they were of being told to stay quiet in church when their hearts were on fire with grief. And the white family wasn't defensive. They were listening. They were breaking too. I saw Jesus standing behind them, his hands on both families' shoulders, and this time he was smiling. Not the soft, tired smile from before, but a full one, proud, gentle, radiant. And I understood. That's what it looks like when the body of Christ really comes together. Not in the big shows or loud declarations, but in quiet humility, in repentance, in painful, awkward conversations that lead to healing. The scene faded and I was back in that strange in-between space, hovering somewhere between time and eternity, and Jesus turned to me again and said, "My church is sick, but there is still a remnant who remember my heart. I'm not looking for perfect people. I'm looking for broken ones who are willing to be healed, then used." I wanted to say I was willing. I wanted to scream it. But I also felt the weight of it. Like agreeing to this wasn't just about telling a story, it was about becoming something entirely new. And I didn't know if I was strong enough. Jesus didn't ask for an answer. He just reached out and placed his hand on my chest, and the moment he did, everything I'd ever carried broke open inside me. Anger, resentment, shame, pride, bitterness, confusion. It all came pouring out like a dam collapsing, and I felt exposed in a way I never had before. But I also felt something enter me in its place, something so deep and pure and alive that it's hard to describe. It wasn't peace. It was power. But not the kind of power the world chases. It was the kind that loves enemies. The kind that forgives people who never apologize. The kind that walks away from arguments and kneels down to wash the feet of the people who hate you. That power filled me until I thought I'd burst. And Jesus whispered one more thing, "I'm sending you back, but not as who you were. That boy is gone. The one who returns will carry a message, and the world will try to twist it, ignore it, or mock it. But you will speak it anyway. And you will not be alone." Then everything started to tremble. At first, just a hum beneath my feet, if you could call them that, but then it grew into something bigger, something cosmic, like the very veil between this world and mine was stretching, pulling, warning me that something was about to shift again. I looked at Jesus and didn't want to let go of him. I could feel it, my return. That I was being sent back into the same broken world I had left, the one still full of division, noise, pain, and confusion. I didn't want to go back. Who would? Who in their right mind would trade perfection for chaos? But I remembered the people I loved. My mom, my little sister, the friends who didn't know Jesus and were hanging on to politics or success or just pure exhaustion to get through their days. I remembered my classmates who sat through church services while scrolling their phones, pretending not to care when deep down they were begging for something real. I thought of the church across town that split down the middle over something as small as what color the carpet should be in the new building, but really it wasn't about carpet. It was about pride. And now I knew what pride looked like from the other side, and how much it broke the heart of the one I stood beside. Jesus didn't force me to go. He never does. But he looked at me, and it was like every word I needed to hear was etched into that gaze. A calling. A commissioning. I wasn't just meant to survive. I was meant to carry something. So I nodded. Or maybe I didn't. Maybe my soul just bent itself toward obedience without me realizing it. But the light began to wrap around me again, and this time, instead of drawing me deeper in, it began to pull me backward. I felt the warmth leaving first, replaced by a coolness that tasted like air and blood and tears. Then the silence peeled away and I heard machines, beeping, shouting, footsteps slamming against tile floors. Then came the pain. All at once. Blinding. Crushing. But it didn't matter. I was alive. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and a blurry ceiling and the sound of someone crying so hard it made my chest hurt. And then I realized it was my mother. She was collapsed on my chest, sobbing, clutching my hospital gown in her fists. I could barely breathe and it felt like my body had been dropped from a skyscraper, but none of that mattered. I had seen Jesus. I had stood with him. And I had to tell everyone. The first weeks were a blur. Doctors amazed I could speak, nurses whispering that they'd never seen anyone recover from that level of trauma with no brain damage. But I wasn't focused on that. I was focused on the message. And I didn't want to tell it like a fantasy or a headline. I wanted people to feel it. To know what I knew now, that the church is in danger not from the world but from within. From its own obsession with being right instead of being righteous. From the way we elevate men instead of the man. From the way we twist scripture into weapons instead of using it as a mirror. I started speaking anywhere that would have me, youth groups, prayer circles, small groups, even podcasts I knew would mock me. I didn't care. I had seen too much to stay silent. Some people cried. Some laughed. Some told me I was crazy or had imagined it all in a coma dream. But I didn't argue. I didn't need them to believe me. I needed them to know him. Because here's what I know. Jesus is not coming back for a divided bride. He's not returning to a house of mirrors where everyone sees themselves but no one sees him. He's coming back for a people marked by love, humility, and unity, not fake smiles, not shallow prayers, but the kind of raw, uncomfortable obedience that costs something. The kind that refuses to cancel people. The kind that loves when it's not trendy. The kind that kneels in the dirt next to sinners instead of standing on platforms pointing fingers. That's the gospel. And that's what I was sent back to say. I'm not perfect. I still struggle. I still feel the tug of pride and the temptation to argue. But every time I do, I remember that stadium. I remember the churches I saw. The people praying. The ones shouting. And I remember the look on his face. The God who still weeps for his people. The God who hasn't given up on us. Not yet. So if you've listened this far, if something inside you is stirring right now, don't ignore it. That's not emotion. That's him. And he's not calling you to win arguments or convert people to your opinion. He's calling you back to his heart. Back to love. Back to forgiveness. Back to surrender. He's calling you to lay down your sword, pick up your cross and follow him. Not into comfort, but into real, costly, honest faith. Please don't wait. Don't brush this off. Get alone with God. Ask him what you need to let go of. Ask him to burn away everything false in you, no matter how long you've carried it. I promise you, if he could take a kid like me, a broken, bitter, distracted, proud kid, and bring me into his presence just to send me back, then he hasn't forgotten you either. He wants you back. All of you. And he's waiting. The weeks after I got out of the hospital were some of the strangest and loneliest of my life. People kept calling it a miracle, but they didn't know what to do with it. At first, everyone was eager to hear what happened. Family friends showed up with casseroles and notebooks, asking questions like it was a documentary. Church folks came by with wide eyes and Bibles, hoping I'd tell them I saw their favorite verse come alive or that I got some secret prophecy about the future of America. And for a little while, I tried to explain. I really did. I sat in my living room with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and told my pastor everything, every single detail, about Jesus, about the churches, about the idols, the political rage, the split pulpit. And I watched his face as I talked, watched the light in his eyes slowly shift to hesitation. It was subtle, but I saw it. It was like he believed me, but only halfway. Like he was willing to acknowledge the part where I met Jesus, but not the part where Jesus was disappointed in what the church had become. The message, the vision, it made people uncomfortable. And they didn't want to be uncomfortable. One lady from our congregation actually pulled my mom aside and told her she thought I was being used by the enemy to bring division. That hit hard. Not because it hurt my reputation, I didn't care about that anymore, but because she was missing the whole point. Jesus didn't show me what he showed me to cause division. He showed me because the division was already there. He wanted to heal it, not hide it. And the only way to heal something is to bring it into the light. But not everybody wants to see. Some people are more comfortable in the dark, even if they say they love the light. So I started pulling back. I stopped answering every call. I stopped visiting every church that asked me to speak, especially the ones that wanted a good story but not the hard truth. I found myself wandering through the woods behind our apartment complex almost every afternoon, just trying to find silence again, to hear that voice again. Not the audible one, but the knowing, the peace, the weight of Jesus that had wrapped around me when I was with him. I'd sit on a rock overlooking the creek with my Bible open on my lap and just weep. For the church. For the people I used to argue with. For the ones who unfollowed me after I posted about praying for politicians they didn't like. For the ones still fighting over who's right, while the world falls apart around them. But I didn't just cry for others. I cried for myself too. Because even after seeing all of that, after being in the presence of Jesus, I still struggled. I still wanted to clap back at comments. Still got defensive. Still got frustrated when people twisted my words or said I should keep my experience between me and God. I wanted to be better than that. I wanted to be all love and light and humility. But I was still me, still human, still in process. And that was something I hadn't expected. How hard it would be to carry a holy message inside a broken vessel. Sometimes I'd stare at myself in the bathroom mirror and whisper, "Why me? Why did he show me that? Why send me back with that kind of burden when I can barely carry my own emotions some days?" I wasn't a pastor. I wasn't a scholar. I was a kid. A kid who died, saw eternity, and came back with a mission that made people squirm. But then I'd remember his eyes. The way Jesus looked at me when he said, "You will not be alone." And those 5 words, they're what kept me going. They still do. There was one day, probably 2 months after I was discharged, when I almost gave up sharing altogether. I had been invited to speak at a youth conference in a nearby city, and I remember thinking maybe this would be the moment it all clicked for someone. I was nervous but hopeful. I prayed the whole drive there, hands gripped to the wheel, asking God to move, to soften hearts, to let even just one person see what I had seen. When I got there, the auditorium was full. Lights dimmed, stage lit like a concert. The guy who introduced me had a hype energy, told the kids they were in for, an amazing testimony from a kid who saw heaven. That line right there, it rubbed me wrong. Not because I hadn't seen heaven, but because I didn't go there just to feel amazed. I went there to be broken and set. But I smiled anyway, took the mic and started talking. I told them everything, again. No edits. No fancy language. Just the raw story. The tunnel. The presence of Jesus. The church that couldn't see him. The stadium of division. The tear in the pulpit. The call to repentance. I poured out my soul like water, voice shaking, hands trembling, trying not to weep halfway through the parts that still tore me open every time I said them. When I finished, there was silence. Not applause. Not shouting. Just silence. A few kids stared. Some looked at the floor. The youth pastor gave a tight smile and mumbled something about praying for the nation, then rushed back on stage to cue the band. The lights went up. Music drowned everything. I stood backstage while worship blared from the speakers and someone from the tech team offered me a bottle of water like I'd just finished a performance. I felt sick. Not because I had failed, because I hadn't. I knew I'd obeyed. But it crushed me to realize that even when you deliver a word straight from the mouth of Jesus himself, not everyone will hear it. Some people can sit 5 feet from glory and still not see it. I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that echoes. And when I got home, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the lights off, staring into nothing until finally I whispered, "Are you still with me?" And just like that, not audibly, but so clearly in my spirit it might as well have been shouted, I heard it again, "You will not be alone." That sentence has followed me. Through rejection. Through confusion. Through those long nights when I start to question whether I really saw what I saw, or if I'm just some kid who hit his head too hard and dreamed something pretty. But then I remember how Jesus looked into me. How he showed me things I could never invent. The way I felt in his presence. The truth that burned into me like fire under the skin. And I know it wasn't a dream. Dreams fade. That moment hasn't. If anything, it's gotten louder. It wakes me up some nights. Not as a vision but as a burden. A weight that pushes on my chest until I get out of bed and kneel down again, asking God to give me the strength to carry it just one more day. And slowly I've started seeing the fruit. Not on stages. Not in crowds. But in conversations. Quiet ones. In hallways, parking lots, messages from strangers online. People who say they've been on the edge of walking away from church because they felt disgusted by all the fighting, the pride, the politics. People who hear the story and don't just say, "Wow," they say, "Me too." They cry. They open up. They talk about how tired they are of pretending. And I tell them they're not crazy. That Jesus feels the same way. That his anger isn't toward them, it's toward the things that keep them from him. That he still loves his church even when it's a mess. That he's still coming back for us, but we've got to get ready. We've got to lay it all down, our pride, our tribes, our idols, our fear. We've got to stop turning pulpits into platforms and start turning hearts into altars. He's waiting, not with wrath but with tears. Waiting for us to finally see what's always been right in front of us. Him. Some nights I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come back. If I had stayed there in that light, in the warmth, in the arms of Jesus, never waking up to the ache of this world again. I think about it more than I probably should, but not out of regret, more out of longing. Because once you've been that close to the presence of God, once you've stood face to face with perfect love, everything here feels dim. The colors, the sounds, even the joys, they're pale reflections of something deeper, something purer. But I also know this. If Jesus let me stay, then the mission would have died with me. And he wasn't done speaking. He still isn't. I see it more clearly now than I ever have. This world, this church, this generation, we're standing on a knife's edge. Every day we're being pulled further apart by our outrage, our fear, our need to be right. And every day Jesus is reaching out, not with lightning or wrath, but with wounded hands, calling us back to himself, back to what matters. And it's not easy. It's not easy to be the one standing in the middle of the argument saying, "Let's repent." People want sides. They want enemies. They want a cause to shout for, a villain to blame. And when you come in talking about humility and forgiveness, about unity and surrender, about tearing down idols, people don't always clap. Sometimes they glare. Sometimes they mock. Sometimes they walk away. But I've learned something else since I came back. When Jesus shows you his heart, and you carry that into the world, not everyone will reject it. Some will hear. Some will break. And when they do, something incredible happens. Heaven touches earth. I've seen it. I've sat across from someone who said they hadn't cried in 10 years, only to watch tears pour down their face when I told them about the vision of Jesus weeping in the back of a church no one noticed. I've watched young people who said they were done with God drop to their knees because they realized for the first time that God wasn't done with them. That he wasn't angry. He was waiting. waiting to be let back in. And the more I share the message, the more I feel it change me. I'm not who I was. I used to argue with people online. I used to feel better about myself when someone I disagreed with fell or got exposed. I used to secretly enjoy gotcha moments. Now I can't stomach them. Not because I'm holy, but because I've seen the damage. I've seen the spiritual carnage our pride leaves behind. I've seen Jesus cry over the mess we've made of his name. And once you've seen that, you can't cheer when someone stumbles. You can't rejoice in division. You start praying differently. You start living differently. You stop asking, whose side am I on? And start asking, do I even look like him? That's become my daily prayer. Lord, let me look like you, sound like you, love like you, no matter what it costs. And it has cost. I've lost friends, opportunities, invitations. I've had people call me dramatic, brainwashed, heretical. But I've also gained something I wouldn't trade for the world: nearness. His nearness. His voice in the early hours when I can't sleep. His peace when the crowd is silent. His strength when I feel like quitting again. I carry him with me now like a fire in my bones. And if even one person can hear this story and feel the same fire begin to spark in their own chest, then every rejection has been worth it. Every tear. Every awkward silence. Every door that's shut. Because this isn't about me. It never was. It's about him. The real him. The Jesus who doesn't take sides, he takes over. The Jesus who tears down every wall we build and invites us to a table we didn't earn. The Jesus who still believes in his church, even when we've forgotten how to be his people. He's not done. Not with me. Not with you. Not with us. He's just getting started. I've started writing it all down, every detail, every memory, every vision, not because I think I'll forget, but because I think someday someone will need to read it when I'm not around to speak it. I've got journals full of notes, sketches of what I saw, prayers I whispered in hospital beds and empty bedrooms when the burden felt too heavy to carry. Sometimes I write late into the night, my hands shaking, my heart beating fast, tears running down my face because it still feels just as real, just as raw as the moment it happened. There are nights I'll be halfway through a paragraph and suddenly remember the exact way Jesus looked at me when he showed me that pulpit split in two. The grief in his eyes, the weight in his shoulders, how even in his sorrow he was still beautiful, still steady, still sovereign. And it undoes me all over again. I try to write it as plain as possible. No flowery language, no embellishments, just the truth. Because that's what this generation needs more than anything. Not polished sermons. Not emotional manipulation. Just the truth. The raw, holy, sometimes painful truth of what happens when you see Jesus for who he really is and then get sent back to tell a church that's forgotten. And it's not just the churches. I've seen it in families, in schools, in friend groups, in marriages. People don't know how to talk to each other anymore. We don't know how to disagree without destroying. We don't know how to listen without forming a rebuttal before the other person even finishes. And that spirit, that division, that constant need to be right, has bled into our spiritual lives. I've met Christians who haven't spoken to their parents in years because of political arguments. I've met young people who left church completely because their questions were met with sarcasm instead of compassion. And it's killing us. Slowly, quietly, but deeply. And Jesus sees it. That's the part that keeps coming back to me. He sees it all. Every ignored message, every bitter conversation, every time someone's pride meant more than someone's soul. He sees it and it hurts him. I'll never forget the way he stood beside that stadium and whispered, "They wear my name, but they deny my heart." I still hear that line in my dreams. Sometimes it wakes me up gasping for breath, as if the weight of it is pressing down on my chest. And maybe it is. Because it's not just a line, it's a warning, a cry, a chance to turn back before it's too late. And that's what keeps me writing, speaking, going. Not a desire for fame or recognition. I couldn't care less about that. It's the urgency, the clock ticking in my spirit. The knowing that every day we delay, someone else slips further away from grace, deeper into the belief that Jesus must not be real because his people don't act like him. And I get it. I used to be that person. Sitting in the back row of church, arms folded, heart numb, wondering if it was all just a performance. But now I know better. I've seen too much. I've felt his presence. I've heard his voice. I've been undone and rebuilt by his mercy. And even on the hardest days, even when I'm misunderstood, slandered, or exhausted, I remember his face. That look in his eyes when he said, "I'm sending you back." It wasn't casual. It wasn't detached. It was fierce, determined, holy. And if he believes I can carry this, then I will. I'll carry it into every room, every conversation, every pulpit, every podcast, every quiet corner where someone's wondering if God still sees them. I'll carry it until my last breath. Because the world doesn't need another opinion. It needs Jesus, the real Jesus. And I won't stop until he's the one they see when they look at me. There's something else I don't talk about much, but it's been sitting heavy in my spirit. Something Jesus showed me that I haven't even told most churches when I speak, not because I want to hide it, but because I honestly don't know how to put it into words without breaking. After the vision of the churches and the stadium and the broken conversations, Jesus walked with me into what looked like a massive mirror, but it wasn't a reflection of me. It was the reflection of the church as it could be. Not the divided, politicized, self-defensive body I'd seen before, but something radiant. It looked like fire and gold and water and light all moving together, like one massive heart made up of millions of people, beating in perfect rhythm with his. There was no platform, no sides, no applause, no agendas. There were just people, repenting, forgiving, praying, worshiping, falling into each other's arms, confessing sins out loud without fear. There were no worship bands, no speakers, no lights, just voices crying out to God, not in competition but in desperation and unity. I saw an old man fall to his knees in front of a teenager and say, "I'm sorry we ignored your pain." I saw a young girl kneel beside an older woman and whisper, "I forgive you." I saw people taking off the armor they'd worn for years, pride, status, certainty, and laying it all at the feet of Jesus. And he was in the center. Not on a stage, not elevated. Just in the middle of them, touching every person who reached for him. And he was smiling, really smiling. I'd never seen a smile like that before. It wasn't proud like, "Look what I did." It was relieved. As if he'd been waiting so long for his people to finally come home. And then he turned to me and said something I'll never forget, even if I live to be 100. He said, "This is what I died for. Not the version you see on Sundays. This." And in that moment, I understood something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. We're not waiting for revival to come. Revival is waiting for us to return. We keep praying for God to do something new, and all the while he's standing in the middle of the room saying, "I've been here. You just stopped looking at me." That vision haunted me in the best way. It made me see everything differently. Every conversation became sacred. Every moment became an opportunity to love, to listen, to repent. And every time I saw a church service, I stopped looking at how loud the music was or how polished the sermon was, and started asking, "Is he here? And do we even notice?" Because here's what I've learned. The most dangerous thing isn't when Jesus leaves the room. It's when he stays and no one sees him. When we get so used to performing that we forget to invite him in. That's the tragedy I saw in some of those visions. Rooms full of people going through the motions while Jesus sat quietly in the corner, unnoticed, heartbroken. And I never want to be part of that again. That's why I've changed how I live. I used to care about being the smartest in the room. Now I care about being the softest. I used to feel like I had to prove something every time I prayed. Now I just cry and say, "I'm here, Lord. Whatever you want." And I've noticed something wild. He keeps showing up. Not in clouds or voices or visions, but in presence. In peace that doesn't make sense. In love that I don't deserve. In strength I didn't know I had. He walks with me. Daily. And every time I tell this story, I can feel him pressing his hand on my back as if to say, "Keep going. They need to hear this." So I do. Even when I'm tired. Even when I'm scared. Even when I want to quit. Because I know someone out there is sitting in the back row of life, wondering if God still speaks. And maybe they won't believe a sermon. Maybe they won't read the Bible just yet. But maybe, just maybe, they'll listen to a broken boy who died and met Jesus and came back to say, "He's real. He's close. And he still wants you." I can feel it now. the weight of everything He's given me to carry, and the peace that somehow comes with it. Telling this story over and over hasn't made it lose its power. If anything, it hits me harder now than it did at the beginning. Because with every time I speak, I see more clearly how desperate we really are, for truth, for love, for Jesus. The world doesn't need more performances. It doesn't need more spiritual celebrities or louder opinions. It needs encounter. It needs real people who've been wrecked by His presence and rebuilt by His grace. And I don't tell this story because I want people to be impressed by what happened to me. I tell it because I want people to know it can happen to them too. Not necessarily dying and coming back, but meeting Him. Really meeting Him. In the quiet, in the middle of their questions, in their grief, in their shame, in their anger. He shows up. I've seen it. I'm living proof of it. Jesus didn't bring me back just so I could tell a cool story on a stage. He brought me back to call people home. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're watching or listening to this right now, and your heart's been racing for the last 10 minutes. Maybe you feel something stirring in your chest, something you can't explain. That's Him. That's the same presence I felt when I stood before Him, the same love that shattered and healed me in one breath. He's reaching for you. Not with condemnation. Not with a checklist. With mercy. With open arms. And if you're tired of the noise, the fighting, the pride, the pretending, then this is your moment. You don't have to clean yourself up first. You don't have to get all the answers. You just have to say yes. Yes to His love. Yes to His truth. Yes to laying everything down so He can build something better in its place. You were never meant to carry this alone. He's been with you the whole time. Waiting. Hoping you'd finally stop running and just come home. So if that's you, I want to invite you, right here, right now, to say yes. To whisper it out loud. Or cry it. Or shout it. However you need to do it, just let Him in. Let Him begin to untangle every lie, every wound, every false identity you've picked up along the way. Let Him take the pieces of your life and make something holy. He's not looking for perfect people. He's looking for willing ones. So be willing. Lay it all down. Surrender the pride. Surrender the pain. Surrender the politics. Surrender the masks. Come as you are and let Him do what only He can do. Heal. Restore. Redeem. That's what He's done for me. That's what He's still doing. And that's what He wants to do for you. Don't wait. Don't brush this off. Don't scroll away and forget it. This isn't just another video or story or testimony. This is Jesus knocking on the door of your heart saying, "Let me in." So open the door. Let Him in. You'll never be the same. And if you felt something while listening, if you know deep down this was meant for you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. With your friend, your parent, your church, your youth group. Post it. Text it. Let this be the spark that sets someone else free too. Because revival doesn't start with platforms. It starts with hearts. And maybe it starts with yours right now.